there lived a man named Edgar, a skilled blacksmith whose mind was a relentless battleground of negativity. Edgar's thoughts were as dark and dreary as the dungeons of a forgotten fortress, a constant barrage of self-criticism and pessimistic ruminations. Edgar's mind was a prisoner of its own making, trapped in a labyrinth of doubt and despair. His thoughts were like a relentless storm, constantly battering his spirit and draining his energy. They whispered in his ear, telling him he was unworthy, unlovable, and destined for failure. Edgar's negative thinking cast a long shadow over his life, isolating him from his fellow townspeople and robbing him of the simple joys of life. He avoided social gatherings, fearing judgment and rejection. His work as a blacksmith suffered as his mind was consumed by negativity, his once skillful hands now trembling with self-doubt. Edgar's life was a perpetual cycle of pain and despair, a never-ending battle against the demons of his own mind. He yearned for a way out of this self-imposed darkness, a path to peace and happiness. But the path to liberation seemed elusive, lost in the fog of his own negativity. Edgar's struggle with negative thinking began in his childhood, fueled by a father's harsh words and a mother's distant affection. He internalized their criticisms and doubts, allowing them to shape his self-perception. As he grew older, these negative thoughts became deeply ingrained, shaping his interactions with the world and with himself. Edgar's negative thinking manifested in a multitude of ways, poisoning his thoughts and actions. He constantly compared himself to others, always finding himself wanting. He focused on his perceived flaws and shortcomings while ignoring his strengths and accomplishments. He saw the world through a filter of pessimism, expecting the worst in every situation. This relentless negativity eroded Edgar's self-confidence and stifled his creativity. He feared failure, so he never dared to take risks or pursue his dreams. He avoided challenges, preferring to remain in the comfort of his self-imposed limitations. Edgar's negative thinking also took a toll on his relationships. He was quick to anger and slow to forgive, his harsh words often causing pain to those he loved. He struggled to trust others, fearing betrayal and rejection. His social interactions were marked by awkwardness and insecurity, preventing him from forming deep and meaningful connections. Edgar's negative thinking was a relentless force, constantly undermining his happiness and well-being. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy, trapping him in a cycle of despair and self-doubt. He was a prisoner of his own mind, unable to escape the darkness that consumed him. As Edgar's life unfolded, his negative thinking became a defining characteristic, shaping his interactions with the world and with himself. It was a burden he carried with him everywhere he went, a constant reminder of his perceived inadequacies and failures. One day, as Edgar trudged through the village square, his mind preoccupied with self-doubt and pessimism, he stumbled upon a weathered poster announcing a public lecture on mindfulness by a visiting monk. Intrigued by the prospect of finding some respite from his relentless inner turmoil, Edgar decided to attend. Edgar poured out his heart to the monk, confessing his struggles with negative thinking and the toll it had taken on his life. The monk listened attentively, his eyes filled with compassion and understanding. "Edgar," the monk began, his voice gentle yet firm, "the darkness that consumes you is not a reflection of your true self. It is a manifestation of your fears and insecurities, a self-imposed prison that holds you captive." Edgar's eyes widened, a spark of curiosity igniting within him. "But how can I escape this prison, this relentless cycle of negativity?" he asked, his voice filled with longing for liberation. The monk smiled gently, his eyes radiating wisdom and serenity. "The path to liberation lies in understanding the nature of your thoughts," he explained. "Your thoughts are not your enemies, Edgar. They are simply tools that you can choose to use for your benefit or destruction." The monk explains the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. The first noble truth, the truth of suffering. The first noble truth, the truth of suffering, is the foundation of Buddhist teachings. It states that suffering, or dukkha in Pali, is an inherent and pervasive aspect of human existence. Suffering manifests in various forms, including physical pain, emotional distress, mental anguish, and existential despair.
The Buddha taught that suffering arises from our attachment to impermanent things. We cling to what we have, fearing loss and change, and we yearn for what we do not have, creating dissatisfaction and discontent. This attachment, rooted in ignorance and craving, fuels the cycle of suffering. The truth of suffering is not about wallowing in misery or engaging in self-pity. Instead, it is about acknowledging the reality of suffering and recognizing its causes. This acknowledgement serves as a wake-up call, prompting us to seek a way out of the cycle of suffering. The second noble truth, the truth of the cause of suffering. The second noble truth, the truth of the cause of suffering, delves into the origins of suffering. It identifies our cravings, desires, and aversions as the primary causes of suffering. Cravings, or tanha in Pali, are our insatiable desires for pleasure, satisfaction, and control. We crave for external things, seeking to fill an inner void or escape from discomfort. However, these cravings are never fully satiated, leading to frustration, disappointment, and further suffering. Desires, or kama tanha, are our longing for specific objects, experiences, or states of being. We desire pleasure, status, power, or love, believing that these things will bring us happiness. However, these desires are often unrealistic and unattainable, leading to attachment, disappointment, and suffering. Aversions, or vihesa in Pali, are our aversions to pain, discomfort, and negative emotions. We try to push away unpleasant experiences, seeking to escape from fear, anxiety, and insecurity. However, these aversions only intensify our resistance to reality, fueling the cycle of suffering. The truth of the cause of suffering is not about suppressing our desires or avoiding unpleasant experiences. Instead, it is about understanding the nature of our cravings, desires, and aversions, and recognizing how they lead to suffering. This understanding allows us to begin to detach from these attachments and cultivate a more accepting and non-judgmental attitude towards our thoughts, feelings, and experiences. The third noble truth, the truth of the cessation of suffering. The third noble truth, the truth of the cessation of suffering, offers a beacon of hope amidst the pervasiveness of suffering. It proclaims that suffering is not inevitable, and that it can be ended through the path of wisdom and compassion. The cessation of suffering, or nirodha in Pali, is not about eliminating all pain and discomfort from our lives. Instead, it is about liberating ourselves from the cycle of attachment and aversion, the root causes of suffering. The path to the cessation of suffering lies in understanding the nature of reality and developing wisdom, or panna in Pali. Wisdom allows us to see things as they truly are, impermanent, interconnected, and subject to change. It helps us recognize the illusory nature of our cravings and aversions, liberating us from their grip. Compassion, or metta in Pali, is the antidote to the self-centeredness that fuels our suffering. It is the cultivation of kindness, understanding, and empathy towards ourselves and others. By extending compassion to ourselves, we can accept our imperfections and soften our self-criticism. By extending compassion to others, we can break down barriers, foster connection, and alleviate the suffering of others. The truth of the cessation of suffering is not a mere promise of future liberation. It is a testament to the transformative power of wisdom and compassion. By cultivating these qualities, we can begin to experience moments of peace and freedom from suffering, even amidst the challenges of life. The fourth noble truth, the truth of the path to the end of suffering. The fourth noble truth, the truth of the path to the end of suffering, provides a roadmap for liberation from suffering. It outlines the Noble Eightfold Path, a practical guide for ethical conduct, mental discipline, and wisdom. The Noble Eightfold Path consists of three main sections: right understanding, right mental discipline, and right wisdom. Right understanding encompasses right view and right understanding, which emphasize the correct understanding of reality, the Four Noble Truths, and the nature of karma. Right mental discipline includes right speech, right action, and right livelihood, which focus on ethical conduct, harmonious actions, and a livelihood that aligns with ethical principles. Right wisdom encompasses right effort, right mindfulness, and right samadhi, which emphasize mental exertion. Edgar, the monk continued, his voice resonating with wisdom. Mindfulness is not about suppressing your thoughts or denying your emotions. It is about understanding them as transient phenomena, arising and passing like the ebb and flow of the tide. It is about cultivating a non-judgmental attitude towards your inner experiences, allowing them to exist without clinging to them or pushing them away. Edgar nodded slowly, absorbing the monk's words as they sank deeper into his consciousness. "But how can I remain calm and accepting amidst the storms of my mind?" he asked, his voice laced with a hint of desperation. The monk smiled gently, his eyes twinkling with understanding. "Through equanimity, Edgar," he replied. "Equanimity is the state of mental balance and composure in the face of both pleasant and unpleasant experiences. It is the ability to observe the world with a neutral mind, without being swayed by the turbulence of emotions." Edgar pondered the monk's words, his mind contemplating the possibility of achieving this inner equilibrium. "And how do I cultivate this equanimity?" he inquired, his eyes filled with a glimmer of hope. "Through the practice of loving kindness, Edgar," the monk explained. "Loving kindness is the cultivation of compassion, not only towards others, but also towards oneself. It is about extending kindness, understanding, and empathy towards your thoughts, feelings, and experiences, even those that are challenging or negative." Edgar's brow furrowed in contemplation. "But how can I be kind to my negative thoughts?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. The monk smiled warmly. "By acknowledging them, Edgar," he replied. "By recognizing that they are a part of you, a reflection of your fears and insecurities. By extending compassion to those parts of yourself that are hurting and struggling." Edgar's mind struggled to grasp this concept, the idea of embracing his negative thoughts seeming counterintuitive. "But if I accept these negative thoughts, won't they just consume me?" he questioned, his voice filled with apprehension. The monk shook his head gently. "No, Edgar," he assured him. "By accepting your thoughts without judgment, you begin to disarm their power. You no longer give them the fuel they need to control you. Instead, you become the observer of your thoughts, rather than their victim." Edgar's eyes widened as a new understanding dawned upon him. "So, mindfulness and loving kindness are the keys to unlocking my liberation from negative thinking?" he asked, his voice filled with renewed hope. The monk nodded in affirmation. "Indeed, Edgar," he replied. "Through mindfulness you gain insight into the nature of your thoughts. Through loving kindness, you cultivate compassion and acceptance towards yourself. And together these practices pave the way towards inner peace and freedom from the shackles of negativity."